Hi everyone, how are you? It is me, Fern. Welcome back to a new video. So lately I have been using the iPod Classic. I've got an iPod Classic 5th generation and it is a 30GB model, completely original, completely unmodded, and I've been using it as my dedicated music device. So a little bit of backstory as to how I got this device and why I wanted to get it. So I've been thinking about getting an iPod a few months ago, and it kind of stemmed from just that nostalgia factor. When I was a lot younger, I wanted an iPod so badly, and I remembered the very first iPod which I got, and it was an iPod Nano in the green color. And I loved that device so much, and at the time I felt like the coolest kid ever, especially having saved up for one of those, and it felt like such a big achievement. I remembered I wanted the Classic at the time but couldn't afford it, but now being an adult and having adult money, I really wanted to get an iPod Classic, and it was something that I had in the back of my mind for a very long time but just never really acted upon it. I've been monitoring some iPod Classics on eBay and other secondhand sites, and a lot of them looked decent, but for the price, I just wasn't really sold, and I still wanted one, but I just couldn't justify spending a couple $100s on a used iPod that potentially required modding or fixing. Fast forward a few months later, I was on a trip to Japan with my partner and my family, and we were in Akihabara, and that's when I came across this iPod Classic 5th generation, and it was listed for sale at around 98 Australian dollars, and I managed to bargain it down to 90 Australian dollars. And at that price, I thought it was a no-brainer. I could test it in store and it worked perfectly. So I sort of jumped into it and I bought the iPod, and I thought, you know what, for $90, I can try it out and see how I go. If I love it, then $90 well spent. And if I hate it, then it was $90. But I can tell you now, I've loved every single moment I've been using this device, and I thought I'd go through how using the iPod has sort of changed the way I approach music and how I listen to music, and also talk about the benefits of using the iPod and also some of the cons as well, just so that there's some sort of realistic expectations for anyone who's interested in purchasing an old iPod Classic. So the main big benefit I found using the iPod Classic is that I have found myself curating my music collection again and being very selective with what I choose to listen to, especially since there is a barrier with putting music onto the iPod. It's sort of going back to the days of having to purchase music or rip music off of CDs and manually putting it onto the iPod. I feel like going back to that old way of putting music onto a device, I am a lot more selective with what I'm putting onto the iPod. So I know for me, one of my favorite genres of music is hyperpop, and I love artists like Slater, and I also love artists like Paris Hilton and Heidi Montag, and being able to, you know, purchase their albums and select music that I really, really love and just curate my library to suit my tastes has been a very interesting experience. It definitely is very different to the, I guess, modern way we listen to music, which is through streaming services where music is consumed very quickly. I feel like being able to carefully select and choose your music has been very enjoyable. One thing for me is I've also been getting back into purchasing CDs as well, and being able to curate that physical and digital music collection has been very fun. So this is something that I really enjoy with the iPod. You're definitely a lot more selective with what you're putting onto the device, especially since you have that storage limitation, and it takes a tiny bit more effort to put music onto the device. As I said before, with streaming, I know with my iPhone, I can just pull up one of the streaming apps and pick a song or pick an album and just save it into a playlist, whereas with this there is that process of having to load things onto iTunes, and I feel like that makes you really consider and be a bit more thoughtful with your music collections. That's something I found really valuable, and I would say is a benefit of the iPod. The other big benefit of the iPod is obviously this device is not connected to the internet. It is purely for music and music only. So the disconnect from the internet has been very valuable for me. I find that with the iPod, you're focusing on the music. So if you pair it up with a really high quality pair of headphones or speakers, it just is you and the music, and that's it. You kind of avoid any of the social media distractions, any messages, emails, anything that may sort of distract your music listening experience. This definitely blocks that. So I've really enjoyed listening to music on the iPod and just have it as me and the music, and it's that sort of experience where you're setting time aside just to enjoy your own music that you've curated. I think having a dedicated device for music as well means that I'm putting my iPhone down a lot more often and I'm just focusing on music. I also love painting, as a lot of you know, so having the iPod to just listen to music and focusing on my creative outlets has been so fun, and I know that you can probably do that too with your iPhone and just block out all the notifications, but having the iPod has been very enjoyable with just focusing on my hobbies, my creative outlets, and just listening to music. The next pro of this device is obviously the nostalgia factor. As I mentioned before, I had an iPod Nano in the green color back in the mid-2000s, but having this again has sort of reignited my love for the 2000s and the technology that came from the 2000s. So I've been really getting into not just the iPod, but I've also been looking at old flip phones like the Motorola Razr or the Sidekick. And I feel like the nostalgia factor of this device is just, it's so much fun. Like, I think with my phone and my iPad and laptop, they're almost like utility devices, whereas for this, it almost tugs at my heartstrings when I pull it out and I get to use it and play music on it. I feel like that nostalgia factor adds a bit more fun to the music listening experience, and definitely is such a big throwback to my childhood and teen years. On the point of nostalgia, I also feel like because this device has the click wheel, there is that tactility to it, and I feel like having a device with tactile buttons, I think I'm sort of reminded how much I do like physical buttons. I think in a world of touchscreens, especially in things like cars and our iPads and tablets and all sorts of devices, it is nice to go back to physical buttons. So I feel like the experience of using this device, just the tactility of it, the clickiness of the buttons and the scroll wheel, I think, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I do love the user experience of this device. I also like that it is just a dedicated music device as well that I can just pull out and use for purely music. I can connect it to my speakers and my headphones, and there's that element of enjoyment because it is a dedicated music device. The next pro with this device is that you can mod the iPod. So when I was going into buying an iPod Classic, I sort of did a deep dive online, looked at Reddit threads and reviews and YouTube videos, and one thing I discovered was that the iPod is very easily modifiable. You can mod this device and upgrade so many internal components like the battery, the hard drive. You can even change the front and back cover to be different colors and styles that suit your tastes. So that's something that I thought was really, really good for me when I was purchasing this device. I feel like I feel comfortable knowing that I can use this device until one of the internal components wears out and I can just replace it. I think having seen the commentary online, it seems like the iPod, being an older device, is a lot more simple to work on compared to modern phones and electronic portable devices. So I think it was almost like a no-brainer purchasing this, knowing that I can mod the device later down the track and upgrade it. So that's definitely a pro, especially for people who want to add features to the iPod. With mine, I keep mine fairly stock, so I have not modded mine at all. It is a original iPod Classic from 2007, but when the time comes, I will probably consider modding this device. So there are a couple of cons with the iPod, and I've kind of touched on them earlier on in the video, but obviously one of the big ones is that iTunes can be a pain to use, and as I mentioned, you're sort of committing to going back to that old way of listening to music. So putting music onto your iPod, having to use iTunes can be a bit frustrating, especially having to curate it and then sync it with the device. It can be a time-consuming and very manual process. Now, there are other ways to work around it, like you can always install Rockbox on the iPod, and that kind of, alleviates that pain point. But again, if you want to keep it stock, there is that limitation that you have to be wary about. The other con that I will mention is that the original hardware in the iPod might not be the best, especially if you get a device that's original from the mid-2000s. So with mine, I have the original battery and the original hard drive, and there are moments where the iPod is a little bit laggy. You can, as I said, upgrade it to a solid-state drive and upgrade the battery to be a larger capacity, but if you choose to buy a stock iPod, you can kind of tell the age of the device with how slow it can be. So those are just a couple of limitations, but I think the benefits far outweigh the cons, and with those cons, there are so many ways to work around it, such as installing Rockbox or modding the device. So those are just some of the pros and cons of me using the iPod in recent months. I feel like having purchased one now and actually using it on a day-to-day basis, I can tell that my music listening experience has changed significantly and for the better. I highly recommend having a look online if you are interested in jumping down the nostalgic iPod route and considering buying one. I have loved every moment of owning one of these, and I feel like it's sort of releasing my inner child. I always wanted an iPod Classic when I was younger, so having one now is such a treat. Those are just some of the thoughts, pros and cons of having this device, and I hope this video was insightful to anyone who's interested in buying one of these. If you want to know more about this device and want to know more about my experience with it, definitely pop a comment down below and I'm happy to answer it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I normally make videos around fashion, travel, lifestyle content, and vlogs, so if you're keen on seeing that content, definitely check out my channel and look at my other stuff. If you're new to this channel, definitely hit subscribe, and if you love this video, definitely give it a like. Anyway, I hope to see you all in a future video. Bye!